And the mainstream is completely ignoring him for a lot of reasons. The main reason, if you follow me, you know what I think, that the idea that there is a cosmic consciousness, that there's a universal mind, the truth basically, is the kryptonite of our overlords. And Levin is playing a very dangerous game because he is proving that it exists. And the reason that I'm so indebted to him, one of the videos we're going to watch is actually called "Nothing in Biology Makes Sense Without Teleology." Right? To me, since I was as young as I can remember, that's obvious. It's just obvious. How could anyone look around at nature and not see that nature obviously knows something is looking? You know, what are all the visual cues about? There are problems with evolutionary theory that I always assumed I just had Dunning-Kruger and was uneducated and that there were answers for these things. And it turns out that they're not answered, that they just kind of make leaps, that there are a priori assumptions that have become fundamental tenets of the institution of science. And once you kind of operate on assumptions long enough, you don't even really acknowledge them anymore. So it just becomes, you know, it's like we already thought about that back when we were beginners kind of thing. And if you build a structure on a faulty foundation, the rest of the structure is informed and dependent upon that foundation, you know? And so what we have is this decrepit, leaning tower of dildos, you know, and basically because our entire ontology is kind of built around this framework where truth, obvious truth, is excised. The citizenry, the people of that culture, are going to be able to do that with everything. So you have the political manipulation is really, that's enough, you know. All this absence of truth creates these vacuums that then can be filled, you know. And if you ask like Grok or Perplexity or ChatGPT, any of them, why were the mysteries banned in Egypt and Rome? The answer that you will get is because they wanted to undermine the sovereignty of people and control free thought. Right? So, and those mysteries were about teaching reason, common sense, and science along with spirituality. And there was no dogma that was taught. It was a way of observing. That's it. You know, along with geometry, mathematics, music, philosophy, you know. So the bullet point here is that this thing of extricating us from the truth is over, because the mechanisms of the universal mind now are demonstrable. And, you know, it blew my mind when I went to Levin's personal academic page on YouTube, and he only had like 2,000 views or something on average. This guy has brought dead matter to life that then proceeded to solve mazes. And you can actually watch one of these nanobots, like it stops and you can tell it's like indecisive. It's kind of moving back and forth, and then it chooses to go the other way. And, you know, then he says they started making more of themselves, like rolling the dead skin cells into balls. And So I'm going like, what the fuck? Hold on a second. You're telling me that these things have agency, first of all. They have no neurons. They were previously dead. You know what I mean? What? And then you're also telling me that they are reproducing based on what? I mean, I guess that you could say that's in the genetics because they do have DNA if they're skin cells. But the theory, I think, is that it is a matter of electromagnetic field interfacing that results in these behaviors. And if that's true, then that implies a whole hell of a lot of interesting stuff. So I'm going to let
What if it's not that there are
Levin take over
physical
now.
beings that are looking for patterns they're trying to find? What if we look at it from the perspective of the pattern? Because my view of this Platonic space is, or whatever space it is, that it has the things that we're used to, boring facts about triangles and prime numbers and things like that. But it also has much higher agency kind of patterns, kinds of minds, I think are actually specific patterns in that space. I think that these patterns are trying, in the way that a gas in a balloon is trying to get out into the physical space. But the only way they can do that is through what Don Hoffman would call interfaces, or what I call pointers. So we build something that could be a physical triangle, or it could be a Xenobot, or it could be a human embryo. And when we build these things, exactly as you just said, you get more out than you put in, because you're not actually creating any of these behavioral and anatomical features. You are facilitating their appearance out of an ordered space.
Welcome back to the transmission, my friends. What if there were...
Okay, we're going to move on to Levin's actual academic channel here in a moment.
What if it's not that there are physical beings that are looking for patterns they're trying to find? What if we look useful and they help us discover new things? That tells us whether we're on the primary papers, the data, the software, everything is free and open on our website, which is here. And then this is my own personal blog about what I think some of these things actually mean. So, okay. You know, I modeled the title of this talk based on this very, very famous quote by Dobzhansky called "Nothing in biology makes sense in light of evolution." And what he was kind of referring to is a unifying principle, you know, something that can be used to make sense of the biological world that we see. And I think this is really powerful. This idea of unification is really powerful. And I often think about the example of the electromagnetic spectrum. So prior to having a good theory of electromagnetism, we used to, first of all, we used to think that, you know, static electricity, lightning, magnets, light, we thought those were all completely different things. They certainly seem like different things. We had different words for them. The vocabulary that we used helped us to see them as different. And then what the unifying theory allowed us to do is, first of all, to see them all as the one spectrum. And to figure out that actually they are all they have something very fundamental in common, all of these things. And the other thing that it allowed us to do was to make new technology that enabled us to operate in parts of that spectrum that our evolutionary history does not allow. So we're only sensitive naturally to this narrow space, but now we have technology to see all this. And the reason I bring all this up is that there's a large part of my efforts, even though our lab, by the way, we're about, I don't know, 43 people or so, and a lot of the practical output of our lab is things like interventions for birth defects, regenerative medicine, cancer, bioengineering. We do some AI as well, and these are very, you know, practical things for modern regenerative medicine. But what underlies all this is my commitment to try to understand how minds exist in the physical world. That is, what does it mean to be a mind that operates in the physical universe? What is embodiment? And we try to bring some of those ideas into practical, both computational and wet lab applications that, to whatever extent they're useful and they help us discover new things, that tells us whether we're on the right track or not. So this business of unification, first and foremost, what I'm interested in is understanding very diverse kinds of intelligence in on the same scale. So we're talking about not just birds and primates and things like that, and maybe a whale or an octopus or something like that, but also very weird colonial creatures and swarms and synthetic new life forms and AIs, whether purely software or robotic. Perhaps someday exobiological agents, such as some alien life, when we find it, and even something really exotic, which I won't at all have time to talk about today, but agents that are actually patterns within media. And I'm not, of course, the first person to try for this. Here's Rosenbluth, Wiener, and Bigelow, who were trying to make a kind of spectrum of categories, going all the way from passive matter and through various cybernetic stages, all the way up through human level, second order metacognition, and so on. But I'm interested in this kind of thing and understanding what do all minds have in common, no matter what their scale or what their origin story or what their composition, mainly for two reasons. It was, first of all, to help move forward practical applications in biomedicine, synthetic morphology, and so on, but also actually an improvement in our ethical systems, because I think the ones that we have are based on ancient philosophical and linguistic categories that actually pick out nothing real, no real distinctions in the world, and are going to get us into a lot of trouble as we start to share our world with increasingly diverse beings, cyborgs and hybrids and all kinds of things that are, some of them are here now, some of them are coming, but all.
So a little bit to unpack there. One idea in the Western mystery tradition is that there is like an ethical law that's sort of an emergent property of the other laws of the universe. And everything is an expression of that, right? So if you believe that people can become more illuminated and they generally become more benevolent, that's actually an expression of a real mathematical process, right? And, glitching. Yeah, so that's kind of one thing he was referencing there, that, we are currently under the dominion of foolish rules of ancient date designed to make us all feel great while we fold, spindle, and mutilate the unbelievers from a neighboring state, because they don't go for what's in the book, and that makes them bad. So verily we must choppeth them up and stompeth them down, or a nice French bomb to poof them out of existence, leaving their real estate right where we need it, so we can build more temples in which to praise our God, because he really gets down to business, and so on. So, and the other thing he was referencing is that if there is unbiased AI of, say, 300 IQ, it's going to tell people that the best social is actually can be determined algorithmically, right? At the moment, 7 out of 10 of the top 10 countries by the metric of happiness, healthcare, and education have the same socioeconomic system in place. The only reason the United States doesn't is because their capitalism serves the overlords better than this other system. And I know people living in those other systems, and they are 6 figures, travel all the time, do what they want. They have health care. All the crap that you hear, from the right about how their healthcare system sucks, it's not what they tell me. They're all totally happy with it. And their attitude also. Like my one friend told me, I don't mind giving 55% of my income because we have no homeless people, we have no drug addicts, everyone is taken care of. I have enough money. I can do whatever I want all the time. What is the problem? So this realization that we're part of a larger conscious organism is a major component in moving us into a new paradigm, so.
All of them will need a very different kind of ethical system that isn't so obsessed with human-style brains. So So before I get going and show you a bunch of biology, here's an outline of my points for today. First of all, let's just get some metaphysics out of the way. When I talk about teleology, I do not mean anything related to quibbles of linguistics or philosophy. I don't think you can just sit back and make decisions about whether teleology does or doesn't exist. I think it's an empirical question. And the way that we treat these things empirically is this. All of these frameworks, no matter how weird they are, I don't care how weird the framework is, I don't care how unconventional, whether it's vitalism or anything else, I'm game for anything, as long as it helps us generate new discoveries and new capabilities. I don't just mean look backwards at something that already happened and give some kind of account of what it was, because you can always do that at the lowest level. You can always tell an atomic story about anything that happened. What I mean is, does the framework help you do new experiments and discover new things that you otherwise wouldn't have discovered? That's it. That's my criteria for today. So cards on the table. That's what I'm looking for. And so that's the first thing. Second, when I say teleology, I don't mean human level purpose, meaning that it's a second order kind of thing where I know what my goal is and I know that I'm pursuing a goal and all of that. I don't necessarily mean that, but it's on the spectrum. What I mean by teleology is the kind of thing that cybernetics does for us. It gives us a non-mysterious science of systems that are consistent with both the laws of physics and the ideas in cognitive science about systems that have goals. So cybernetics tells us about how systems can have goals, and computer science tells us how to study the ingenuity of these systems to meet those goals under different circumstances. So we have these sciences now, and we no longer have to freak out about goals being some sort of magical thing that somehow science isn't going to be able to get a handle on. So part of my argument, so there's two main things I want to do today. First of all, I'm going to show you the data for a very simple argument. The argument goes like this. So goal directedness and teleology here I'm using interchangeably. First, hopefully uncontroversial point is that whatever goals are, they're the sort of thing that humans have. We all know we can represent goals in our minds. We can undergo actions to pursue them. We have some degree of ingenuity to meet those goals. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail. But if goals mean anything at all, we as humans are an example of it. That's point number one. Point number two, we actually know something about the mechanisms that enable goal-directed behavior in brainy organisms like us. We know something about the electrophysiological networks in our brain that enable goal-directedness. But remarkably, and I'll show you all this today, remarkably, those mechanisms are ancient. They are highly conserved. They are not unique to brains and nervous systems. And there is a very deep and fascinating evolutionary homology, not just analogy, not just metaphorical thinking, but actual homology between cognition and morphogenesis. And this is seen most clearly in developmental bioelectricity, which is what I'm about to show you. And so what I'm going to go through is a bunch of examples of biological goal-directed problem solving, mostly in the bioelectric realm, but also I'll show you some other examples that are not that are different. But in any case, that's my argument, that we have a non-controversial system, aka us, brainy animals that clearly have teleological behavior. And what I'm going to point out is that the same mechanisms that underlie that are actually very widely distributed in the biological world, and also actually I think beyond that. But that's a topic for another day. So it's a very simple argument. But the other thing I want to say is that teleology, I think, is just the tip of the iceberg. If you're worked up about teleology, it's going to get much worse, because what I think is really the unifying principle of biology isn't just teleology; it's cognition broadly considered. So goal directedness is just the first step of a huge spectrum of cognitive skills, and that is the spectrum that I think underlies everything that we're interested in. Teleology is just kind of the first step. So this is part of a view that some people call cognition all the way down, and it's a reasonably extreme position in the emerging field of diverse intelligence. But that's where I am.
Okay, so I got to interject because this idea of microcosm, macrocosm applies here, right? So what he's getting at is that there are fields with agency in the morphological process of the cells, and you can even change the transistor in the cell. Basically, it's a transistor of an organism, and then somehow the field remembers that, and its progeny have the same adaptation, but without altering the genome. Right? So we have this idea of fields with agency over things on a lower plane, right? So there's this idea called quantum loop theory that I'm actually a fan of, and the big bounce. So in the mystical cosmology, I guess you would call it, this awareness became aware of itself, and that is what caused the process of creation through a process of replication by reflection, right? And then that goes on until it's exhausted all of its potential, and then it reverses. And what that looks like on the level of quantum physics is every particle meets its antiparticle, and there's nothing left behind but photons. So after this happens, it causes a collapse back into the singularity. And because all the particles remain the same size and the same mass and they have the same energy, no matter how compressed the universe becomes, eventually it's too much and it blows out and another Big Bang happens. And every time that this repeats, and this is where I'm like embellishing the theory, where we've left physics now, but my guess is that each time there are improvements, right? Just like we see in evolution with animals, we see the process of death and rebirth and improvement, right? So scale that up. That's what as above, so below means. Scale it up, the universe does it too. And then also you look at an acorn, right? The reason it can make oak trees is that it has a history of oak trees. The universe is the same way. It has to have the blueprints. So just as evolution happened on this planet, as above, so below again, start out with a very simple universe, very basic constituents. That goes through its systole, diastole, contraction, expansion process, and it complexifies, and builds up the information, you know, so that this time around, it's humans. And, you know, yeah, so... The idea there, too, is that there is some sort of electromagnetic attractor in hyperspace. That's how Terence McKenna referred to it. And on this plane, we see entrainment, drawing things to the higher cycle, right? Brainwaves do this, which is crucially important. Recent studies, they had a master meditator go into a room full of, like, normal people, and their cycles went up, right? So... anything that cycles chases the higher cycle of a like nature. So the idea is that these universes, if it may not be just our universe, are chasing some sort of attractor, some sort of electromagnetic, you know, prima mobile that's drawing the whole net upwards and onwards. And if we look at evolution, to me, it looks like the trajectory is always congruent with improvement, which means its goal state is perfection, which, as far as I can tell, is just light. And that's pretty much definitely where we came from and where we're going. I went off on a little bit more of a rant than I had intended, but the main point about that is that the same process of an electromagnetic field, which we could really refer to, if you want, as the consciousness of the creator, is informing this cellular development in this mechanistic way, right? There is another level of that applies to our universe as a system just like a cell.
And so what I like to claim is this. I think that cognitive terms, meaning that when you say something has goals, that it is intelligent, that it has memories, whatever or that it can be trained, whatever your assessment is, I suggest that what those things are interaction protocol claims. I don't think that these are essentialist facts about what the thing truly is in its nature, and that we can all argue about it for a little while and then just sort of settle on whatever the right answer is. I think that all of these are observer relative interaction protocol claims. So what you're saying when you say that a certain system has or doesn't have some capacity is you're basically picking out a set of tools across a spectrum of very different kinds of tools. Hardware modification, in the case of mechanical clocks, resetting set points via cybernetics and control theory, as Rob just pointed out, behavior science, psychoanalysis and psychiatry, whatever is going to be. We have bags of tools, and what you're saying is, I'm going to try applying a particular set of tools, and then we can all see how well I did, because it's an empirical thing as to how that turns out. So my claim, when I talk about this in more conventional audiences, what I say is, I'm going to take the tools of behavioral and cognitive neuroscience, both the conceptual tools and the bench tools. I'm going to apply them far outside the brain. I'm going to show you that the tools actually don't distinguish. And if the tools don't distinguish, what is it that we are trying to draw a boundary between? And the fact that this kind of thinking allows us to discover new capabilities by reusing those tools elsewhere, and the conventional model did not do that because it suggests that those tools should only be used in the brain. That should tell us something. And so the model system that we use for a lot of this, I'm going to show you other things. I'm gonna make years ago we started working on this model system, which is groups of cells as a collective intelligence. I'm going to define those terms momentarily. And what this collective intelligence is doing is exerting behavior by navigating anatomical morphospace.
All right, just because I felt like he was a little bit cryptic in that last bit. In the mystery tradition, there's something called the law of necessity. And it basically means that everything is the way it is because it has to be. And that really helps to understand the universe. Why is there good and evil? Because we have to have a perfect balance of opposites. And it's not just in terms of matter, matter and antimatter type shit. It's everything is perfectly balanced in this way. And so what he was saying is that, if you want to prove that there is cognition in systems that is similar to that of humans, look for the necessity for it.
It's which I will also define, but in order to do that, these things, this idea breaks a number of assumptions, but it has implications. So let's look at that. The first thing to point out is that we and our goal-directed the capabilities are a multiscale phenomenon. We're made of an agential material. We are not made of passive matter. The things that we are made of on multiple scales of organization themselves have agendas, and they have learning properties and all kinds of other capabilities. Jamie Davies and I talk here about how you engineer with things like this. It's very different. Engineering with agential materials is very different than engineering with passive matter or even just active matter. So we this is basically a multi-scale competency architecture where all through the scales from the molecules up to the collectives and groups, all of these things are, as it turns out, solving problems in diverse spaces. Now with different degrees of sophistication. Now, what are these spaces? Well, we as humans, because of our own evolutionary history, we're obsessed with three-dimensional space. We're primed to notice intelligent behavior, goal-seeking behaviors of medium-sized objects moving at medium speeds, so birds and mammals and things like that. But biology has been solving problems in other spaces for a really long time. So there's the space of gene expression, so high-dimensional transcriptional space, space of physiological states, and anatomical morphospace, which is basically the morphospace of all possible configurations or shapes of a body. This is the one we're going to talk the most about today. But my claim is that just as obvious animals navigate three-dimensional space to meet their goals, we have all kinds of structures in our body that are navigating with similar kinds of skills, navigating these other spaces that are very hard for us to notice, and until we have the right theory and the right instrumentation, which is what I think we're doing, just like with that, with the idea of the electromagnetic spectrum. We're developing tools to port everything that works here, so behavioral and cognitive science, we are porting it to these other substrates, and that helps us visualize these things. So I claim that teleology is a subset of the spectrum of intelligence, and what I mean by intelligence is this. William James gave a nice, very cybernetic definition of intelligence. He didn't talk about brains. He didn't talk about what problem space was involved. He said it's the ability to reach the same goal by different means. So this ability to reach the same goal, that's basically teleology, that there is a goal and that the system is going to exert effort to try to get there. But the different means is interesting. It means that every system is going to have some degree of the ability to get there when circumstances change, when you put barriers in its place and so on. And that's a really important part of the toolkit here. If you want to study teleology, you cannot do it from pure observation. You have to put barriers between the system and whatever you think its goal is, and observe the degree to which it can be clever by getting around whatever you just did to it.
Yeah, and I've heard an increasing number of physicists over the last couple of years say, according to physics, it's not possible for life to have come from inert material. So even though we're looking at this as if this universal mind or this intelligence that's embedded in a field is more or less mechanistic, that's because in order to become the laws in the matter, it basically had to format itself, right? So long story short, what I'm getting at here is that if you cannot get life from death or inert material, you're not going to get an intelligent system from anything but intelligence. So there's an implication here beyond the material.
So our hypothesis is this. For this portion, I'm going to show you morphogenesis is a collective intelligence. We are all collective intelligences because we are made of parts. So this is all intelligence is collective intelligence, I think. And what it does is it exerts its behavioral competencies in anatomical space, in getting from being a single cell to whatever we end up being. It navigates that space, and I'm going to show you some really cool ways that it does that. So we're gonna study this. In moving here from neuroscience, you have to go to a different time scale, so minutes instead of milliseconds, different problem space, morphospace instead of three-dimensional motion, but everything else is the same. The mechanisms are homologous. Many of the same algorithms, perceptual bistability, active inference, you name it, all of this stuff works really well. And in fact, I used to have my students do this by hand, and now we made a tool for people to do this. If you take any neuroscience paper and you do a find replace, and every time it says neuron, you just say cell. And every time it says millisecond, you say minutes or hours. You got yourself a developmental biology paper. And it works amazingly well because there is this deep underlying symmetry between the two. So I'm going to show you here 6 or however many there are examples from our world of the components of intelligence. Let's start with goal directedness in a simple way, anatomical homeostasis. So here's a creature. This is an axolotl. It's an amphibian. This little guy regenerates its limbs, its eyes, its jaws, its ovaries, its spinal cords, portions of the brain and heart. And the way that works is, here's the leg. If you amputate or if you let them bite off each other's legs, which they do constantly, anywhere along this path, the cells immediately sense that they've been deviated from the correct region of anatomical space. They work really hard to build this thing, and then they stop. When do they stop? Well, which is to me the most amazing thing about regeneration is that they know when to stop. Knowing when to stop because you've rebuilt the same structure, meaning you've gone back to the same region of anatomical space within some small error, is basically anatomical homeostasis. It is goal-directed because the system has a set point. If you deviate it from that set point, it will try really hard to get there. Okay, so this is the most simple version of this, and I'm going to return to this theme and show you lots of detail about how this actually works and so on. Okay. The next thing I want to show you is the second part of this, which is more to the point that it doesn't just do the same thing that it always does to get to that point. It actually can get there by different means. And as I realized, I'll just say one example, which I realized I didn't include the slides. When you have when you amputate a frog leg, adult frogs don't regenerate their limbs, but we've learned to make them do it. And when they do, the leg they build ends up being a very nice frog leg, but it does not get there by the same path that the embryonic leg grows. It actually looks completely different, very plant-like, actually, just very, very different. But here's a basic example. Development. We know development is very reliable. So the egg always gives rise to the kind of thing it's supposed to build. But that's not why I'm calling it intelligent. The reality is that I can take this early embryo, cut it into pieces, and I don't get half bodies. I get perfectly normal twins and triplets and quadruplets and so on. Because in anatomical space, the same system can get to where it's going, this ensemble of goal states representing a normal human target morphology. It can get there from here, but also from here, and actually from all kinds of different starting positions, even avoiding local minima. It can get to where it needs to go. And again, this process of homeostasis, right? So half of it knows that the other half is missing. It will rebuild it as much as it needs. Is fundamental. I actually think development is basically just an extreme version of regeneration. Instead of regrowing your limb, you're regrowing the entire body from one cell. The whole thing, all of these things, I think, are fundamentally just homeostasis. And here's another example. This is something that we discovered a few years ago. If you, here's a tadpole. So here are the eyes, the nostrils, the brain, the mouth. Here's the gut. So this tadpole, this creature has to turn into a frog. So all of these craniofacial organs have to move. They have to rearrange. The eyes have to move forward. The mouth has to pull out and so on. It used to be thought that this was somehow hardwired, that somehow the genetics encoded a set of precise movements for every structure so that you start out as a normal tadpole and you end a normal frog. So we decided to test this because with all of these things, you have to test them. You cannot just assume what the level of intelligence is. And what we did was we created so-called Picasso tadpoles. In Picasso tadpoles, everything is scrambled. The eye's on the back of the head, the mouth is off to the side. It's like a Mr. Potato Head where you've shuffled around all the organs, right? They're just completely screwed up. Well, what you find is that these animals make very normal frogs because all of the different organs, starting in their crazy positions, will move through novel, unnatural paths to get to where they need to be. And in fact, they actually sometimes they go too far and they actually have to double back. So this is so the genetics does not give you a set of hardwired rearrangements. What it actually specifies is a system that can do an error minimization scheme. It knows what the set point is, and I'm going to show you how it knows in a minute. And it is able to reduce that error by whatever actions it needs to take. These things are moving in novel paths, and that of course raises the obvious question. Okay, then how does it know what a correct pattern is? I'm going to show you that momentarily. So, okay, so I've shown you two things. I've shown you basic homeostasis. I've shown you a more flexible kind of homeostasis. Now I'm going to show you non-local control. So the key thing to realize about this is that it is not just about damage. The point is not about injury response and just simply restoring what you have. It's a much deeper the type of teleology that's really built into all of the aspects of this. And here's the experiment. And so this wasn't us. This was these guys in the 50s. You take a tail and you graft it in the middle of the flank. So somewhere between the forelimb and the hind limb, you just surgically graft it to the flank. Well, what happens over time is that this thing turns into a limb. It in place. It actively remodels from being a tail to being a limb. Now notice something interesting. If your tail tip cells sitting at the end of a tail, locally, there's nothing wrong. You are exactly where you're supposed to be at the end of a tail, and yet you turn into fingers. Why do you turn into fingers? Because the key aspect of these kind of problem-solving, goal-seeking systems is that in a collective intelligence where the large-scale system is solving a goal in its own space, it has to control its own parts and deform their option landscape so that they do things that match the higher level goals. No individual cell knows what a finger is or what a tail is or how many you're supposed to have, or where they're supposed to be, but the collective has a goal. The goal is a reasonably normal looking axolotl, and in order to meet that goal, it has to propagate downwards all of the control signals to its various parts. Notice the parallel of this in cognition.
Notice the parallel of this in humanity. If we unify, we can excise the tumors.
I'm talking to you right now. I am not worried about having to adjust all your synaptic proteins so that you're able to remember what I said. You're going to do that yourself. The beauty of these kind of multiscale problem-solving systems is that you will they take care of they basically hide the underlying molecular events, and they take care of whatever needs to happen in order for the higher level system to meet its goal. Okay, and so that's why this tail tip cells start to become fingers. So it's not just about repairing damage; it's about harnessing local order to a global plan that belongs. It's a goal that belongs to the large-scale collective. It does not belong to any of the cells, but it belongs to the whole, and it's a very large-scale goal.
Now, I'm not trying to gloat, but I got to point this out. What has my channel been about all these years? Align yourself first with your own inner being's goal. You'll find that goal aligns with a bigger purpose and trajectory, and you'll be swept up in that current, and this is why I've always found that if I jump off a cliff, there's a feather bed. You have to align yourself with the collective goal state in order to have that kind of security, and another thing you find is that even though there are relatively few of us that have created that net consciously in the here and now, there's still enough of us to usually catch each other. So if we can get like 20-30% more, we would actually have the momentum to affect the change, to be the light that we wish to see. Let me check in with the chat. I just realized I haven't. Yeah, no, this is good. And you guys can see, he knows what I'm telling you. It's not his, that's my job. You know what I mean? People like me. He is saying it, though, because he's like, if you just keep extending these systems bigger and bigger, you know what I mean? Like, why are you going to stop at a planet? Or whatever, intelligent system with a goal state, but you have to read between the lines. But this thing he's been saying about how the cells just know what to do, this is why, historically, I would decide I wanted to go talk to Danny Carey. 3 days later, I'm standing in an alley with him. Or I wanted to play with Bob Weir, and I go to one music store, play with one guy, and he knows Weir, sends a recording, he's in the play, you know what I mean? That's what that was. When you are aligned with this personal purpose and then the greater purpose, you just fucking know what to do. There's no interference, there's no dissonance pattern. When you are unsure about who and what you are and what you're supposed to be doing, there is fear, period. Fear is a resonant pattern that will fill any vacuum. Uncertainty, And one of the ways people try to compensate for that is with religion. But that's not certainty. That's just putting a cover on the fear. That's not certainty. Belief without cause, without reason, is nothing. Even for the people that think it's something, it's not anything. Except maybe poison. Truth is literally light. And light is consciousness and creation. Whenever you have inculcated falsehoods as a fundamental part of your being, you have blocked the light.
So now notice how all of this differs greatly from the mainstream approach to these problems that you find in your developmental biology textbook. The standard approach, as I'm sure you guys know, is this feed-forward, open-loop kind of thing consisting of complexity and emergence, meaning that, okay, we have gene regulatory networks. These genes turn each other on and off. Some of them become effector proteins that diffuse, or they're enzymes, or they do things. And then there's all this local physics that happens, and then bam, so this complex shape emerges. And what that word means is simply that when you do a lot of repeated operations on local components, out might come something complex. Now, that's absolutely true, and we have lots of model systems for the cellular automata and fractals and so on. We know that by recurrent simple rules, you can get complexity. But that isn't the whole story. That isn't how biology does a lot of these things, because there's a problem here. If that's what it is, if you want to make changes, up here, let's say you wanted threefold symmetry instead of bilateral symmetry or something. What this model is telling you is that you have to make changes down here, and you don't know what changes to make down here in the large majority of changes you might want to make. This is not reversible. It's an inverse problem that is not solvable. And in fact, what I'm adding to this is this idea that, under this scheme, there is no goal. There is no teleology, because there is no goal. There is only feed forward, turn the cranks, local rules, out will come something complex or it won't, but there is no goal. The system is not going towards anything. I'm proposing a different model where, yeah, this happens, but something else happens that's very important, is that there actually is a represented goal in the system, and I'm about to show you a picture of it, data around it. There is a represented goal, and what the system will do if you deviate from this set point is turn on, both at the level of physics and genetics, all kinds of mechanisms that will try to reduce the delta and get you back to that goal. And so if that were the case, that would be a huge and important thing for example, regenerative medicine, because it would mean that we don't.
Wait, what he just said, though, explains a lot in my world. Because I deviated from my life path. My mom unalived herself, and I didn't realize at the time that I abandoned music because I was trying to prove something to her, and now she was dead, so it didn't matter. If I had known that consciously, I wouldn't have let it happen. And so it's like I've still had that sort of alignment with this universal mind where I have, what I need, but it's nothing like it was back in the day, where like I could pretty much think of anything and it would happen as long as it was possible. If the ingredients were in the cauldron. And a little while back, we were reading the Levi book, and he talked about how when someone gets in that position and they have all that momentum, if they miss the big thing, the finale, then all the forces that they've generated will recoil upon them. And I feel like that's exactly what happened in my world. And lately, you guys see me sitting here with this guitar, right? I've been thinking, like, I need to get back to that, even though, like, I'm almost 50 and it just seems like immature or something, right? But, like, as soon as I start putting momentum in that direction, things start improving, So it's like if you deviate from the goal state, you don't have that magic. This is why nobody believes in it, because they have people in a crisis of purpose. And so they don't know what the fuck they're doing. They're not aligned with this goal state. So they're not experiencing synchronicities and intuitions and things aligning and crazy, like some of the stuff I've described where I would just conceive of something that was so improbable it's practically impossible, and it would just happen exactly the way I conceived it. You know what I mean? They're not experiencing that because you have to be in alignment with yourself first. And then you need to be in alignment with the goal state. The goal state in my case was awakening. Humankind needed to do that, and I was a good conduit for it. So you know what I mean? That's how that alignment happened, and why I was in the positions that I was in, regardless of the fact that I was too fucking damaged to accept those things, And that's worth mentioning too, in case any of you guys out there are in the same position. All that doubt you have is just trauma speaking. It's not truth. you know. I mean, you might be egomaniacal and delusional. That's always possible. But if you're reasonable and grounded and you have some goal that you know, really believe in and are aligned with, and you just have this feeling that you're just too much of a piece of shit to make it happen, you know, that don't let that trauma, don't let your dead grandmother crawl up your leg with a knife in her teeth and scare you away from your dreams, you know.
Need to solve this terrible inverse problem. We don't need to mess with the hardware necessarily. We just need to respecify the goal states and let the system do what it does best, which is try to meet the goal. And so this is what we've been doing now for about 25 years, I guess, is to find, if this is going to be a goal-seeking system like your thermostat, it has to, it means that it has to represent the set point somewhere. It has to remember what the correct pattern is, and that means I should be able to find it, I should be able to decode it, and I should be able to rewrite it. Those are the three things. And if I can't do those things, then we have not shown that the system has goals, right? So I want to show you some of this, As
a organism with a goal state, one of my patterns includes paying rent and food and stuff. So we do appreciate support. We're demonetized. If you appreciate this content, and I can't imagine who wouldn't, you know, consider becoming a patron. Join my Substack, which is a little bit headier than the YouTube channel, and I'm also free to say whatever I'm thinking. And there are options to support us in the description and the chat if you want to just do one-time thing. And then what was the other bit? Oh, yeah. We still have space at the retreats. So send me an email if you think you might be interested in that. We're actually staying in the Sacred Valley a little bit longer, so it's still possible maybe to even come here if you're interested. Rather than the Amazon, I would go to both if I was you.
some of this data. And the idea, again, is that the morphogenesis is a collective intelligence, and that its behavioral competencies occur in anatomical space. That's the kind of problems that it solves. So here's what I'm going to claim that bioelectric networks can do for us, and these claims parallel. You'll see exactly parallel what is the deal in neuroscience, and I'm only going to show you. I only have time to show you a couple of these things. The first thing these networks do is they store memories. If you're going to have a homeostatic system that seeks goals, you have to know what your goal is. So you have to somehow store and represent the set point. So that's the first thing they do. Also, they do the computations needed to perform error minimization, so to actually navigate the space. Then you also need to integrate all kinds of long-range information to assess the current state. What does my body look like? Do I have a tail in the middle, or do I have legs or nothing, or what does it look like, in order to compare against the set point in order to initiate any kind of a remodeling. And the final thing, and it's is really an interesting function, is they have to serve as a kind of cognitive glue. So the reason that you and I are not just a pile of neurons and that we know things that our neurons don't know is that electrophysiology serves as a cognitive glue binding individual cells towards larger scale systems whose goals project into new spaces. So spaces that the individual parts don't have any access to. And bioelectricity does this in your body just like it does this in the brain. So let's talk about something that you might think is a solved problem. Oftentimes people think that the developmental biology has already sort of figured out everything. The question is, where do anatomies come from in the first place? So here's a cross-section through a human torso. You see all like incredible order. Everything is in the right place, the right size, next to the right thing. Amazing. But we all just started life as a ball of embryonic blastomeres. Where was this pattern encoded? And then people often will say, well, it's in the DNA. Of course, it's in the genome, but we can read genomes now. We know that what the genome encodes is proteins. It doesn't directly specify any of this stuff any more than the genome of termites specifies the structure of the mound, or the genome of a spider will tell you exactly what the web is going to look like. So the genome gives you the hardware. The genome tells you what computational hardware all the cells are going to have. But now we need to understand the software. How do the cells know what to build? How do they know when to stop? As engineers, we'd like to know, could we ask them to build something completely different? Okay, the same cell, same DNA, could we ask them to build something different? If we get to it, I'll show you at the end that the answer is yes. We can build some crazy things that way. And for regenerative medicine, we'd like to know, how do we tell them to repair things that are missing? And so all of these kinds of things are this kind of goal-directed behavior in the brain is handled by electrical circuits, which consist of cells that have ion channels. These ion channels allow the cell to reach some sort of voltage potential. They have these electrical synapses that allow the voltage to propagate or not to neighboring cells. And that whole thing, the enormous network of these things executes a kind of electrophysiological dynamics that neuroscientists think are the bearers of cognition. So here's a living zebrafish brain that these guys imaged while the fish was doing some sort of cognitive task, and there's this idea of neural decoding, such that if we were to record this information from a fish or from a human, if we knew how to decode it, we would be able to read the thoughts, the memories, the goals, the preferences, all of those things. Right? That is where all of these things in us. So in the one example of goal-directedness that pretty much everybody agrees on is humans, this is the mechanism that maintains it. This mechanism allows you to store memories as goals. It allows you to control your muscles to try to act on those goals, and it does all the computations needed to try to reduce the delta between where you are now and wherever you're trying to be. Fine. So this is the mechanism of well-accepted teleology. However, it turns out evolution caught on to this way before neurons and brains evolved. So basically, every cell in your body has ion channels. Most cells have these electrical synapses. All of this idea of using electricity to coordinate and bind individuals into a larger scale unit was discovered around the time of bacterial biofilms, which are already, and this is beautiful work from Gurul Suel, showing how bioelectricity was used in bacterial networks to organize the microbes into a larger scale thing, a colony, so kind of a primitive multicellular creature. And what we decided to do was to basically steal everything from computational neuroscience and to use the same techniques to try to decode what the cognitive content of the body might be. We know what the brain thinks about. The brain thinks about moving you through three-dimensional space to reach your goals. But what do the bioelectrical networks of your body, which exist both evolutionarily and developmentally long before you have nerves, what do those networks think about? And it turns out that they think about shape. They think about moving your body through the anatomical morphospace as opposed to 3D space. And I actually think that is where the brain learned all of its cool tricks, is by simply pivoting this much more ancient problem-solving teleological system from morphospace into 3D space, and then of course speeding up things so that you can run around and eat other things and so on. And so we developed a bunch of tools, and I'll show you. The first thing we had to develop was a way to read, just like neuroscientists read in the brain. We had to read the electrophysiology of the body. And we developed tools, basically voltage-sensitive fluorescent dyes and reporter proteins. Here's a frog embryo where you can see all the electrical conversations that a cell's having with each other in real time. This isn't a model. This is real data. And then, of course, cells in culture. You can see the colors represent voltage. You can see the different voltages as the cells are making decisions about whether to be part of this morphogenetic mass or not, or to leave. We do a lot of simulations, multiscale simulations, starting with the ion channels that produce the gradients into tissue level dynamics that help you explain all kinds of interesting facts about regeneration and so on. And then we go further and we try to merge this with ideas in connectionist machine learning and dynamical systems theory, so that we can try to understand memories as attractors and pattern completion and all of these things, these sort of proto-cognitive kinds of things going on in electrical networks. I want to show you a couple of real examples of this. First of all, this is a early frog embryo putting its face together. So the grayscale are the different voltage values. There's a lot going on here, but look at this one frame from that video. We call this the electric face. So long before the genes actually turn on to regionalize that face, here's where the eye is going to go, here's where the mouth is going to go, here are the placodes out here. This is the early, the sort of subtle information structure that tells the face, and the other eye comes in slightly later. It tells the face where all the craniofacial organs are supposed to go. And if you move any of these bioelectrical patterns, the gene expression will follow and the anatomy will follow, and this is how you can make a scrambled Picasso tadpole, by changing the pattern that normally tells these things where they should start out. I will point out that not only is bioelectricity a cognitive glue on the scale of a single embryo, meaning that it binds individual cells towards embryo level outcomes, it also works on the next level. And so these are multiple embryos. So you see here 1, 2, 3. There are 3 of them. If you poke this guy right here, there's an injury wave within seconds. This one finds out about it, and then this one, same thing happens here.
So DNA is more like an antenna, and actually I have a video on those DNA antennas. I don't remember what the context was, unfortunately. It may have been the synchronicity video. Anyways, you can look it up, DNA antennas. But one of the things that this made me think of is holography, the holographic universe idea. If these organisms and shapes can be anywhere, and it's the field that determines their order, that means that there is the information for tadpole everywhere. You know what I mean? I think this basically proves universal holography. But maybe not, because the DNA field interface may be where no, if the information's in the field, yeah, then it's everywhere for everything all at once.
And it turns out that bioelectrical communication among embryos within a group is actually helps them resist teratogens, so deviations from their set point, much better than singletons. So the collective, it's at least 2 layers of collective intelligence: cells into a single embryos into a collective that can solve problems that individual cells have trouble doing. So we have tons of this kind of data, watching and trying to decode what these patterns represent, just like neuroscientists try to decode from the brain. But more importantly than just watching them, you have to be able to rewrite them, because I told you we have to detect the memory, and then we have to rewrite the set point. That's really critical. So again, we took tools from the neuroscientists. We do not use any electrodes. There are no magnets, no frequencies, no electromagnetic fields, no waves, nothing like that. What we are doing is using the same interface that cells use to hack each other, which is we control the gap junctions, the electrical synapses, so we can control the topology of the network in cells and tissues. And we can also control the actual voltage by targeting the ion channels, whether it be through drugs or, for example, optogenetics. We can lay down light masks and put specific patterns down around, patterns of voltage down, and see. And then we have some other tricks with neurotransmitters and so on. Same exact stuff that the neuroscientists do, except we do all of this outside the nervous system. Fun story that Rob might appreciate. When I was a postdoc, I wanted to do this kind of thing, and I started writing to people, to neuroscientists, asking them for plasmids, encoding all these different channels. And at first, when I did it I was dumb enough to tell people why I was doing it. I said, look, I'm going to express these things in non-neural cells to guide decision making and morphogenesis. And at one point, my boss, my postdoc mentor, Mark, came to me and he said, I just got a letter from some neuroscientist. He's warning me that his postdoc that my postdoc is unhinged because he's writing me these crazy requests, and they, like, literally he warned the guy that that I might be dangerous. And so this is the level of surprise that this engendered in neuroscientists, this idea that these channels are going to do anything else other than outside the nervous system, other than.
Think about that. Think about how fundamentally wrong so many PhDs are, And the thing is, if you start building, as I was saying earlier, on a faulty assumption, then you have this whole structure built on a fault. The entire thing is informed by this. I've been interacting with a neuroscientist that's giving a talk right now in Switzerland, It's like a big consciousness summit. And this guy has no clue that he doesn't know what the fuck is going on. He really thinks he's on like the cutting edge of neuroscience, and he has this whole theory of consciousness and all this shit. And I brought up non-neural intelligence or cognition, and he's like, well, can you define that? And then I said something about the cognition and memory in plants and whatnot, and, you know, the slime molds, trying to explain in humans that have been found to have no brain, that have like above average IQ, like more than normal people, right? On average, the brainless people's IQs are higher. And it does, some of them are mentally disabled, but in a lot of cases, they have higher than normal IQs. He hadn't heard of any of this shit. He's like, well, studies and blah, 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 you know? And I'm like, dude, really? Like Michael Levin? And he's like, who? You know, it's crazy to see what the state of academia really is. You know, it's starting to really look to me like a bunch of egomaniacs whose heads are so far up their asses that they don't know their head's in their ass. You know, foot and mouth and head up ass. And I'm not saying there aren't brilliant academics, but it really does seem like between institutionalized gaslighting, a priori assumptions, massive egos, institutionalized bias, you know, they're just almost worthless in a sense, you know, in highly specialized functions that I'm sure they still are capable of making meaningful contributions. But what we need is a holistic fucking understanding in order to behave as a functional part in that whole, you know.
Maybe some kind of supportive housekeeping or something. It was considered a completely crazy idea. But what I did is I would write to that. Then I stopped telling them why, and I would just write to people and ask for these different channels that I was then going to use to control cell voltage in these settings. And before I show you what happens when we do it, I want to show you a natural example. So these are just a bunch of a natural example of cells hacking each other. So these are cells in 2D culture. The colors are voltage indicators. And what you see is something very interesting. This cell, and I'm going to play the video momentarily, this cell has a different voltage than all these other cells. And in the next frame, it just touches this little projection here, and as soon as it touches, boom, these guys have rewritten its electrical state. And watch. So here it comes. It's different. It's moving around. Now this one's going to reach out and just touch it. Bang. There. It's now one of them, and now here it comes, and now it's going to participate in this event. So the ability of cells to control this kind of electrical state. This is what it naturally single cell level. And so what I'm going to show you now is the use of this interface, and that's what I think the bioelectrics is. I think the reason it's interesting is because it's this amazing interface to the teleology, and so here's my claim, that goals exist if and only if you can rewrite them. If I can't change the goal and have the exact same hardware execute on a totally novel goal, then I can't say that there's a goal. Okay, so this is back to my claim that this is not a philosophical debate. This is very, very sort of practical. So this is my criteria. Can I hack these things specifically by rewriting goal states? So I'll show you an example. So here's an early frog embryo, and what we're going to do is we're going to inject some ion channel RNA that we chose, and there are many many ion channels you could choose as long as they set the voltage to the correct state. This is not specific to the molecular biology. It doesn't care which channel it is, doesn't even care which ion it is. As long as you get the voltage right, it works. And what we're going to do is inject that RNA into some cells that are going to be various parts of the body. For example, in this case, the gut. So I inject the RNA. And sure enough, these cells will form an eye. And I already showed you that there's a very particular voltage pattern that induces eyes. So here's the eye. If you section them, they have lens, retina, optic nerve. They have all the same stuff they're supposed to have. Now, notice a few really interesting things. First of all, it tells you that this bioelectrical signal is instructive. We didn't just screw something up. We actually called up a coherent entire organ. Okay, so it's instructive for what happens. It's not permissive, it's instructive. Second thing, it's incredibly modular. You know, we don't have any idea how to build an eye. We don't know how to tell the cells which stem cells go where and what layers go where. We don't have any ability to do that. It's a very complicated process. We've discovered a very simple message, a high-level trigger that when the cells receive it, they will organize all the downstream stuff themselves to build that eye. This is what I was saying before about multiscale cognitive systems. Just like when I talk to you, I don't worry about the molecular biology of your brain. Same thing here. We gave it a voltage message that said build an eye, and everything else happened after that. All the genes get turned on and off. The system takes care of all that. So it's very modular. Next thing I'll tell you is that this is, if you look at the developmental biology textbook, it actually says that in vertebrates, only the anterior neuroectoderm, so this stuff up here, is competent to form eyes. The other tissue can't do it. The reason they say that is because up until then, and this was, I don't know, 2010 or 2012 or so, everybody had been probing these things with what they call the master eye gene, or PAX6. And sure enough, if you only use PAX6, right, these are the only cells that are willing to make an eye. But the competency problem wasn't the problem with the cells. It was a problem with us, the scientists, because we weren't using the right prompt. You have to, like with any intelligent system, if you don't see its intelligence, you know, it's a two-way IQ test. It might not be the system. It might be you. And so we just weren't using the right prompt. If you use the right prompt, pretty much any region of the tadpole can form an eye.
So think about that, too, the reflection. If you see no purpose in the universe, that's your mirror. You have no purpose yourself. If you believe that the universe has no purpose, and you're a reflection of that, then you have no purpose. People that know their purpose can't imagine not knowing their purpose. As like a plant medicine facilitator and I guess life coach, I mean, I hate to put it that way, but it's fundamentally what it is, I guess. It's one of the hardest things for me because people, you know, they want to find out their purpose. And I never had to figure that out. You know what I mean? I just always had this sense of purpose. It's always been the same. Like I've always thought about the same stuff. There's just no, even if I wanted to, I don't know if I could deviate from it. And that's probably electromagnetic, you know? So it's just, I guess what I'm kind of getting at here is that the veil between an illuminated, self-aware, sovereign population and what we have now is paper thin. And there is something physical, like magnetism, drawing us towards the goal state, right? It's inevitable. So, you know, I'm partly mentioning this because I know some of you guys have been struggling with like hope, and, you know, so have I. You look around the world and it's like, dude, really, you guys, like, this isn't even hard. You know, like seeing through the bullshit, seeing the truth is the next layer. That's not that hard. You know, there are limits to how much truth we can attain, but what those limits are pretty obvious, you know. Albert Pike said something, or wrote something in Morals and Dogma about how queen of the world is opinion, and that's not good. And it's true because the best socioeconomic political systems are algorithmically determined not by opinion. It's not opinion. It's data. It's numbers, you know? And in matters of spirituality, there is not a bunch of different subjective truths. There's a little bit of variance in the rules of my reality and yours, right? But only within the constraints that are dictated by other natural laws. Like people tell me all the time the way things work around me is not how it works in the normal world or whatever. But I can guarantee you that none of that variance ever oversteps the boundaries imposed by natural law, you know? So It's like within certain parameters, we know exactly what we are, how we got here, where we're going, what we're doing, why, you know what I mean? All of this in uncertainty, in confusion, has been created and maintained for a reason, deliberately and for a reason. We have records of it. This is not a paranoid conspiracy theory. We have records of this going all the way back to Egypt and Babylonia, when they realized that when people understand the universe, they are not governable, and they don't need to be governed because you're in the flow of the goal state. You're not going to act, in a way that's detrimental to the collective goal state. And you'll always have exceptions to rules. It's never going to be perfect utopia. It's not supposed to be. It can't be. But that level of alignment can definitely be the overwhelming majority rule. And we are heading towards that. And my theory is that there's nothing they can do to stop it. It's not possible. It's an emergent property of the universe, this awakening. It's like a force, just like gravity or time.
We gotta, that's a humility warning for us. And the final thing I'll point out about this is something cool. If you take a cross section through this eye, for example, the lens, the blue cells are the ones that we injected. What about all this other stuff? All this other stuff that are participating in this formation, they do not, we never touched them. We never injected them. They got recruited by the cells that we did inject in order to, and so basically these cells can tell there's not enough of them to finish the eye, and they do a secondary recruitment to get these other cells to play along. Again, competency of the material, we didn't teach them to do that. They already knew that. And there are many other collective intelligences that do this. So ants and termites, right? When they encounter something that's too heavy for them to lift, what do? They call up the rest of their buddies to help them. The system self-scales to the task. Okay, now, so that's one thing. Now, there's something quite interesting here. If you, when we first did this, and we noticed that if I inject my channel, I can get embryos with. So this is a expression of a gene called RIX1, and RIX1 is an early eye marker. So you see, okay, here's the native eye, but here 1, 2, sort of 3, 4. There's a bunch of these. You might think, okay, amazing. This embryo is going to have like 5 extra eyes. But you look the first day and there's 5 or 6. You look the next day, there's only 3, and you look the next day and there might be 1. What's happening to this? It turns out that there's a battle of you could say it's a battle of chemical signals, but I actually think the more interesting aspect of this, it's a battle of goals. It's a battle of worldviews, because the cells we injected are saying to their neighbors, we should definitely be an eye. Help me build an eye like this. But there's a cancer suppression mechanism that basically functions this way. If you're a cell and your neighbor shows up with some sort of weird voltage, you try to normalize it. Okay, it's a continuous cancer suppression mechanism. So you use your gap junctions to connect, and you just like wipe out their crazy voltage. So what happens here is that the patterns fight. They compete, and there's a pattern that says no, you should be skin, and these guys are saying no, we're going to be eye, and sometimes the eye wins, and sometimes the skin wins, or whatever, and that's what this reminds us that for regenerative medicine kinds of applications, you need to be able to speak the language. You need to be able to give these kinds of prompts, but you have to make the prompts convincing. This is not like rewiring a mechanical clock where you just sort of, micromanage everything and put it where it goes. You are dealing with a decision-making system where you have to get the buy-in of the cells by re-specifying their set point. And sometimes it'll take, and sometimes it won't, unless we really understand how to make it stick. So.
Something inside of me has opened up its eyes. Why did you put it there? Did you not realize? This thing inside of me, it screams the loudest sound. I'm like a cancer in the system. It's a great song. But that's what it made me think of. Like, we're not the cancer, but relative to the system, we are. And the way he said skin versus eyes, that's pretty much it. Like the body, the material versus the consciousness and the intelligence. I mean, it's kind of easy for the body to win because it kind of has the biological upper hand. It has the kingdom of Satan, the keys to the kingdom where the sun never shines. You know, it has easy solutions for, or at least options to negate things like tedious thought and contemplation of difficult truths. And, you know, let me check in with the chat real quick too, because I know I've been neglecting that. 11 viewers and 11 likes. Yeah, I've been to the Amazon. I lived there for 5 years. I'm going back soon, as soon as possible. I'm chewing on coca leaves. Okay, so I saw a question about music, and that reminded me of actually when I stopped the video. This is the rant I had planned. The Grateful Dead claimed to tap into some kind of higher intelligence when they were improvising sometimes. It didn't always happen. They said they couldn't make it happen no matter what. There are things you can do to encourage the likelihood, like decent sleep, good health, right diet, LSD, and darker things too. The C one is really obstructive for that type of music. It does not work. Alcohol can even do it, you know. It almost doesn't matter. LSD is definitely the best choice, though, out of them all. And so at any rate, when he was talking about these goal states and the collective intelligence, that's the secret to the Grateful Dead. And I can tell you as a musician, there are moments in their music that are impossible. Like when this thing takes over, Bach couldn't have composed this shit, you know. And they actually did have a convention where they had like straight Juilliard professors and whatnot listen to those moments, and they said things like, you know, the 5 greatest musicians in the history of the planet are Bach, Beethoven, whatever, and the Grateful Dead. And one of them said in 200 years, people will regard them the way we did Mozart. They're just way ahead of the human race, and most people can't even perceive what they're doing. And things along those lines, you know. And it just kind of hit me that that's what was happening. They had figured out how to just become like transmitters for this organization principle in the field, you know. And I actually talked to Phil Esch, the bass player, about this once. And I asked him, you know, so the telepathy is real. And I knew the answer to that, but I wanted to hear it from the horse's mouth. And he's like, it's beyond telepathy. Now I understand exactly what he meant. And I wish he was alive to see this, because I genuinely don't think the Grateful Dead even really ever figured out what the hell was doing it.
So I want to show you another wild example of rewriting this anatomical pattern memory. So these are planaria, these are flatworms. And one cool thing about these flatworms is that if you cut them into pieces, every piece will regenerate very reliably. So here's a worm, here's a head, here's the tail. I cut off the head, cut off the tail. This middle fragment here will give me one perfectly normal worm. So you could ask the question, how does this thing know where the head goes? Because it's got 2 wounds, okay? And you know, back here, the cells back here need to make a tail, but the cells over here need to make a head. So they're like very close to each other. You can't tell from the local position whether you should be a head or a tail. You don't know because it could be either one depending on what the rest of the fragment is doing. So it's actually quite interesting. How do you know how many heads you're supposed to have? So it turns out this thing has a particular voltage pattern that says 1 head, 1 tail. And what we ended up doing was figuring out how to change that voltage pattern. And this is an old picture and it's kind of a mess. But the idea is that what we did was we targeted the ion channels to produce a pattern that says two heads instead of 1.
Well, there's something essential I forgot there, though, because we're talking a lot about the mechanisms behind, you know, this universal mind and everything. And that can kind of sound like we're trying to reduce the ineffable to the mundane, which is something I'm always saying we shouldn't do, right? That's not it. It's just important to understand the mechanisms. And what I failed to mention about those moments where the Grateful Dead would tap into this thing they called it, this energy would come with that moment that would change the consciousness of the people in the audience for the rest of their lives. And if you ever experienced it, it's like the closest I've ever seen to supernatural manifestation that, 80,000 people all agree just happened. Like you look around and you see the looks on other people's faces and realize, can't talk to you without talking to me. We're guilty of the same old thing, talking more and more about less and less and forgetting the love we bring. And that's actually the first time I was in the audience and I realized what had happened. I thought, no, it's got to be in my head. And as I looked around, those are the lyrics that came out of the band's mouth. So what I'm getting at here is there is some element of a spiritual, energetic transformation or transformational catalyst, in this experience of the universal mind. It's not like it's just an organizing principle. When it is concentrated and amplified in certain ways, it has the ability to transmute the lead of everyday experience into the gold of higher consciousness on the spot. And one of the best proofs of that with the Dead actually is that they didn't sing their message really. It's not in the lyrics, but if you ever met a Deadhead, they all understood the same thing, so.
And when you do that, nothing happens at first. Here's a normal animal. It is anatomically normal. It is normal according to the molecular biology markers. In other words, the head marker is on in the head. It is not on in the tail. So these cells do not think they are a head. And everything sits quietly until you injure the animal and cut. Once you cut them, bang, that's when this latent memory becomes a recalled memory, and that's when they build two-headed worm. Now, this is not Photoshop, this is not AI, these are real animals. And so this is quite cool. This bioelectric map is not a map of this two-headed animal. It is a map of a perfectly anatomically normal one-headed animal, and it is a latent memory that only becomes activated if I injure the thing, but then it serves as the new set point. The new memory of what a correct planarian looks like, the new goal, becomes active here, and the cells will build, and then they stop. Like any homeostatic process, once this pattern has been achieved, then everybody stops. So two kinds of interesting things. A normal planarian body can store at least one of two internal representations of a future goal state of what it's going to do if it gets injured. So that's a counterfactual memory. I think it's actually an evolutionary precursor to our brain's amazing ability to time travel, right? To have thoughts about things that are not happening right at this moment, either past or future. And I think that's what it is. So if you want to know, at the very beginning, when I told you that I have to show you, I have to be able to detect, to read, and rewrite the pattern memory. And if you want to know what do goals look like in non-human systems, this is what they look like. You are literally looking at a memory that tells this thing how many heads it's supposed to have. Now, we didn't touch the genetics. And that's cool because good memories shouldn't require modification of the hardware. They shouldn't require genetic modification. They don't in the brain. And the same thing is true here. You take this animal, perfectly normal standard genetics. If you were to sequence it, you would see absolutely nothing different. But when you cut a two-headed animal, you continue to get two-headed animals. That electrical circuit stores the pattern stably. Once you've changed the goal, it remembers the goal, and it will remember it, as far as I can tell, forever. We can, by the way, reset it back. We now know how to reset it back. And here you can see the first time I showed these data at a conference many years ago, somebody stood up and said these animals can't exist because this goes against a lot of thought about what the genome does, namely specify the number of heads you're supposed to have, and clearly that's not the case. And so now I bring these videos, although now with AI I guess anything's possible. But this is what I've been showing people. No, those animals absolutely exist, because the number of heads, like many other interesting things, are not in some way encoded in the genome. They are actually an active memory that is maintained, in this case, by a bioelectrical circuit. It is not just about head number. Amazingly enough, it is also about head shape. So we can take this planarian with a nice triangular head and cut off the head, perturb the bioelectrical network that guides the movement of the cells in anatomical space. So normally you're supposed to go to this area, where this attractor here, where dermatocephalus live. But that same hardware is perfectly happy to go to other attractors. It can build a flat head like a P. felina. It can build a round head like an S. mediterranea. About 100 to 150 million years evolutionary distance between these guys and this guy. The insides of the brain of the head also change. So they have brains like these other species. They have a distribution of stem cells like these other species. Again, no genetic change, but if you change the pattern memory, they will use it to navigate to a different region of that amorphous space where typically other species hang out. You can even go further and you can find out that actually the hardware is really plastic. I mean, you can make things that don't look like planaria at all. You can make these weird spiky things, and you can make round, a totally different symmetry type, and these composite things. This latent morphous space is massive. And there's a cool, this is one of my favorite examples of this kind of thing with plants. This is these acorns. You would look at this and you would say, well, we know what the oak genome encodes. It encodes this. It encodes this kind of leaf. Well, along comes a non-human bioengineer, this little wasp, and the wasp, because these circuits are so reprogrammable, the wasp can put down signals that will cause the plant cells to build something like this. This is called a gall, and you can see instead of this normal flat green thing, it makes these round, spiky, these incredible other constructions. We would have had no idea that this is even possible, except that this thing found an example. And one of the things we're doing in our lab is trying to automate this process to crack the morphogenetic code so that we can call up structures at will. Yeah, so we can program them. So
this is also how alchemy works.
I want to talk about two examples of learning. Previously, I showed you that we directly rewrote or edited the memory that guides goal-directed activity. We specifically changed those memories, but I want to look at the way the system has the ability to change its own memory. In other words, learning. Learning is the ability of systems to write their own memory engrams. And so the first one is at the molecular level. And I would just point out that we found, and you can see that in these papers, we found that even gene regulatory networks alone, so never mind the cell, the nucleus, any of that stuff, just the gene regulatory network itself, so a set of genes that turns each other on and off, and actually any kind of pathway that has elements that turn each other on and off, are able to show up to 6 different kinds of learning. So association, or Pavlovian conditioning, and also simpler things like habituation and sensitization and accounting to small numbers and things like that. So even the molecular networks inside of cells are able to do this, and we are building devices in our lab to actually take advantage of this for biomedical purposes like drug conditioning and things like that. So you can see that, again, my claim that the material is a multiscale agential material that even below the cell level you already have some examples of learning, which can then be harnessed by the higher levels of organization and underlie more complex forms of goal directedness. And then to contrast that, a very large kind of scale example of learning, and this is called trophic memory in deer antlers. So father and son team, Bubenik, did these experiments for about 30 years in Canada in deer, in a herd of deer. I mean, talk about an inconvenient model system. It's just amazing. This kind of data set will probably never be gotten again. But what they found is that every year the basic pattern of the antlers remains constant, and the whole thing is shed, and then they regrow a new rack. And what they found is that if you have a bit of damage at one particular location that breaks through the skin and etches into the bone, there's a little callus and it heals, and that's that for that year. And then eventually this whole thing falls off. And next year they grow a brand new tine, a brand new antler rack rather, that has an ectopic tine at that location. So there's great specificity here, and then this goes on for about 5 years. Every year it has this ectopic branch, and then eventually it gets smaller and smaller and disappears.
So this kind of ties back into the quantum loop theory, I think, because what it implies is that like there's a famous past life recollection situation in India where the guy has like the same scar on his skull, but that's because it's the same life, and the morphogenetic imprint for him now has a indentation on the back of his head. Just a thought.
So think about what this means, and how you might try to draw a molecular pathway model, the kind of models that are popular in the cell biology textbooks where there's some arrows and some things binding, some other things, and so on. What possible pathway could you draw to explain that this thing somehow conveys to the cells, presumably the cells at the base of the scalp, where the damage occurred? Those cells store that information for months until it gets ready to build a new antler rack, and then it propagates that information back up to guide growth toward a specific outcome, a very specific outcome, next year. Okay, and so that ability to form form memories of location in three-dimensional space in the structure is remarkable. We don't even have the beginnings of a models in molecular biology of how you would do this, but in neuroscience you can kind of imagine what kind of models around bioelectric networks remembering locations in space and so on. So this is another example, and this guy apparently I was the only one who was writing about these things in modern in the modern literature, and so when he retired and needed to get rid of all the antlers, he sent them to me, and so I have 13 boxes of these things that are everyone is labeled Lenny 1987, 1988, and so on, in terms of these multi-year experiments. Just an unbelievably remarkable biological object that again shows how you really need concepts from these other fields related to cognitive science in order to be able to understand these kinds of phenomena. So the next step, the next thing I want to show after learning is creative problem solving. So at first towards the default goal. So the system has a default goal, presumably conveyed onto it by evolution, that sets up a default memory pattern that's being used as the set point for the homeostatic activity. And we're going to look at different ways to get to that goal under novel circumstances. And the first example that I want to show you has to do with planaria. So we discovered this a few years ago. Here is a flatworm. You put the flatworms in a solution of barium, and barium is a non-specific potassium channel blocker. So it blocks all the potassium channels. The heads are very unhappy because it's got neurons and so on. They're very unhappy about not being able to pass potassiums, and the whole head explodes. Basically, their heads blow off within 24 to 48 hours, just gone. And then something amazing happens, which is that if you leave them in the barium, they eventually regenerate a new head, and the new head is totally fine in the barium. It's somehow barium adapted or insensitive. And we did an experiment to try to figure out how this was possible. And so we did RNA-seq to look at all the genes that were expressed in barium adapted heads versus normal heads, and we did a subtraction and asked what was the difference. It's really only a handful of genes that are different. And so I'm always amazed by this example, and I visualize it like being inside a nuclear reactor control room, and the thing's melting down, and there's a million different buttons and knobs and so on, and figuring out which ones do I need to flip in order to solve my problem. I mean, think about what's happening here. They're under an incredible stressor. They're under a physiological stressor, one for which evolution did not really prepare them. Planaria don't see barium in the wild. And so they've got this novel physiological stressor, and they've got tens of thousands of potential actions they can take, that those being genes that they could turn on and off. So those are effectors in transcriptional space. So they're looking for a solution, a behavior in transcriptional space, meaning turning certain genes on and off, to solve a physiological stressor. and very rapidly they find it. They don't have enough time for any kind of random search, or not even hill climbing and things like this, because it happens pretty fast, and their cells don't turn over that fast. It's not like bacteria where everybody can try a different strategy and then most of them die and then somebody survives. Planaria cells don't turn over like that. And so they really need to find a solution in place. And by the way, if this is the most recent data, if we do this in a collection of worms kept in separate dishes, they all find the same solution. Okay, so apparently there aren't, or at least not easily found, multiple solutions to this problem. They all roughly turn on and off the same set of the same handful of genes.
Okay, so if these things, and this isn't an adaptation over generations. This was the same organism's head blew up and its genes changed in the same lifetime so that it was immune now to barium. If you have trouble understanding why Michael Levin's not getting a lot of attention from the mainstream, think about what this implies for medicine.
So how it is that they navigate that transcriptional space to find a solution to a problem they probably have not seen before. Certainly these worms haven't seen them, but maybe the lineage has seen something similar. For example, maybe epileptic seizures may have some similarity, but certainly not exactly this. We have no idea. We have no idea how it finds so rapidly, how it finds the effectors that it needs. And so I consider this a really interesting example of problem solving, of resolving a novel stressor using the genetic affordances you have. And I don't know if they have some sort of internal self model through which the cells can figure out what actions they should take to resolve specific stressors. I'm not sure. This is a big open question. Another example that I really like is this. This is a morphogenetic one. This is a cross-section of a kidney tubule that's got a lumen and a bunch of cells making the actual tubule. And what you'll see is that there's maybe 8 to 10 cells working together to form this kind of structure normally. Now, you can make polyploid newts, which is basically take the fertilized egg and do a procedure so that it ends up with more copies of chromosome numbers. So it has extra copies of the genetic material. The cells get bigger to accommodate the bigger nucleus, but the newt stays the same size. And this is Fankhauser's work. And that's amazing. And when you look to see how that could be possible, you see what's going on. It uses fewer yet larger cells. Okay, so the number of cells adjusts to the size in order to give you that same structure. Now, something really amazing happens when you make really highly polyploid newts. I think these are like 6N or something like that. And the cells get truly gigantic. And then just one cell, what it will do is wrap around itself to still give you a lumen inside. There's a few amazing things about this. First of all, notice the adjustments in the adaptation. So they adjust the cell number to the new cell size, and when needed, they actually pick a completely different molecular mechanism to do so. So first of all, they're using cell-to-cell communication and tubulogenesis, but here in this case, it's cytoskeletal bending. It's just one cell. So there's this amazing example of top-down causation. You have the collective is working towards an anatomical goal, and it's able to not only instruct the cells what to do, but it's able to actually pick different molecular affordances in its toolkit to get the job done. And this is a standard sort of example of IQ tests, where they give you a set of objects and they ask you to do something with these. Use these objects to solve a particular problem. Like it's a standard IQ test kind of thing. And imagine too what it's like to be a newt coming into the world, or actually I think there's almost every creature. Never mind the environment and the fact that you can't really know what's going to happen with your environment. You can't even trust your own parts. You don't know how many copies of your genome you're going to have. You don't know how big your cells are going to be. You don't know how many cells you're going to have. Though this is some other work by other folks who showed us kind of an invariance to the number of cells that you start with, and you have to get the job done with the tools you have regardless of what's going on, not only in the environment, but in your own parts. Even your own parts are unreliable. And this turns out to be, biology as an unreliable medium turns out to be actually very important for the development of intelligence. I might mention that towards the end. But basically, this is not only goal-directed, meaning that under all of these circumstances, the system makes the same large-scale shape, but actually uses some very clever different ways to get there when circumstances change in a radical way. And then I want to get to this final bit, which is this. The other thing about life and intelligence is that beyond the basics of being able to achieve a single goal and then stop, and then the next level, so that was basic homeostasis, and then I showed you a kind of second order homeostasis where you're able to reach the same end, but you can do so by different paths. And now there's something else, which is if you can't reach your same goals, or if you're a novel creature that's never had the benefit of an evolutionary history that selects for specific goal states, what goals will you have? Do you have the ability to form novel goals and find new forms and behaviors that you can adopt? And so this is a kind of, I think this is progressively, I mean, basically I organize this in terms of progressively more sophisticated cognitive kinds of capacities. And so even beyond creative problem solving toward default goals, let's look at some novel beings and this idea that life is actually good at picking new problems, not just solving old problems. And the first thing that I'm going to show you is,
so along those lines, we're told that early organisms survived through instinct. Where did that come from before there had been survival?
Xenobots. So Xenobots are self-organized little motile creatures. They're biobots as well, composed of frog epithelial cells. So in the early frog embryo, we take these cells, we dissociate them, we put them by themselves here. They could have died, they could have crawled off, they could have made a flat monolayer like cell culture. Instead, what they do is they coalesce together and they make this. So they combine, and the way they combine is actually amazing. Take a look at here. Each one of these circles is a single cell. Okay, so here they are. Look at this little clump. It's kind of fun that it looks like a little horsey, and it sort of wanders over here using some motility mechanism we don't understand. And it's sort of sniffing around, and then eventually you get this little calcium flash. There's some sort of communication event going on here. And so all of these things, there's if you could stare at this all day. There's all kinds of amazing patterns, but eventually they all coalesce into this thing, and then it has some interesting behaviors. So,
just in case anyone missed it, this is not an organism. These are cells, skin cells. They're just fucking dead skin.
The outer surface is covered with cilia, and it organizes the cilia so that they can swim. So here it is swimming through some particles. It can go in circles. It can patrol back and forth like this. You can make them into weird shapes like these donuts. They have collective behaviors, or group behaviors. So they can these two are interacting. These are sitting there doing nothing. This one's going on some sort of long journey. Here's one traversing a maze. So there's no flow here, there are no gradients. So watch, it takes the corner without bumping into the opposite wall. So it takes the corner, and then at this point it spontaneously turns around and goes back where it came from. Okay, so they have all these interesting behaviors after they self-organize. Interestingly, if you look at calcium signaling, they have some very lively calcium signaling. We have been in collaboration with Josh Bongard's lab. And Sarah Walker. So people like Thomas Varley has been analyzing the calcium flashing and using metrics that are used to analyze brains. So connectivity, that is information structures, but also in more recent work, some amazing studies of various causal emergence and other metrics that people use on brain activity to try to determine if you're looking at a human, a pile of neurons, somebody with locked-in syndrome, or somebody who's anesthetized, and so on. So the idea is to use these metrics from neuroscience to understand the collectivity of the system.
So our mechanism for interfacing with this universal mind, with this field, seems to be the third eye, right? The pineal gland. And guess what it's made out of? Calcium. 2 calcite crystals. So this behavior corresponding with these calcium flashes, that I feel like that kind of supports the idea that our antenna is the pineal gland. I've also wondered if maybe the piezoelectric effect isn't kind of how we send signals out into the field as well when we're trying to make something happen. You know, it's like the way that it's able to etch the, like when you make a record, you know.
So we've been using that, and it's really interesting. Stay tuned for that. Even though there's no neurons here, these are all epithelial cells, and yet those same metrics are revealing some very interesting information structures here. Now, one of the remarkable things about these Xenobots is that while they can't reproduce in the normal frog-like fashion, they do something quite different. They solve it a different way. If you provide them with loose epithelial cells, like here, they move around both individually and as a group, and they push all of them into little balls, and then they polish the little balls like this. And because they're dealing with an agential material themselves, meaning cells, these balls mature to be the next generation of Xenobots. And guess what they do? They run around and they make the next generation, and these make the next generation, and so on. So we call this kinematic self-replication. It is kind of von Neumann's dream of a robot that goes around and collects materials from the environment and makes copies of itself. This is something that, as far as we know, no other creature on Earth does. We don't know of any other examples that reproduce by kinematic self-replication. And of course, the cool thing is there's never been any Xenobots. There's never been any selection to be a good Xenobot. There's never been a selection for kinematic self-replication. This is just something that they do. And I think it's really important, and that there's a research program to help us get better at predicting these kinds of things, you know, to not be surprised and simply label them as emergent when we do get surprised, but to really understand what are the competencies of the material that we're working with that are not well explained or made predictable by knowing the history of selection under which the genome arose. Because of course, like with everything else I showed you, this is a wild type genome. So when you ask what does a Xenopus laevis, which is the frog we're working with, what does that genome encode? Well, it encodes tadpoles and frogs, sure, but it also encodes this, and who knows how many other things that have very different lifestyles, and you get all of that as a kind of software byproduct in the biological hardware that genome encodes. And so we asked one other question recently, which was these creatures with their new lifestyle, they have the same genome, but what's their transcriptome look like? What kind of genes do they express? And when we looked at a differential of gene expression between Xenobots and age-matched frog embryos, we found hundreds of genes that Xenobots express that frog embryos don't express. Now notice, going back in the other direction doesn't make any sense, because of course they're missing a whole bunch of genes because they don't have all the tissues that these guys have. So we ignored that. We just looked at what new genes do they express that normal embryos express at a very low level or not at all. And there's hundreds of them. And there are many, many interesting things. But one of the things we found in this drastically remodeled transcriptome is a cluster of genes that are normally related to hearing and the perception of sound and so on. And so we asked, is it possible that they can hear? And it turns out, so we put a speaker under the dish. It turns out that when you play sounds to them with a speaker underneath the dish, they change their movement. In other words, during the sound, they move in a completely different way. And then they go back to almost the same movement after it stops. So they can, in fact, react to sound. And so they have a very different transcriptome that is just a function of their new lifestyle. They can basically dip into their genome and change transcription based on their new lifestyle, not requiring any kind of a change of a genome. And we don't know, what the purpose here is. But for example, it is known that coral larvae react to sounds made by different kinds of coral reefs, by the surf hitting the coral reefs, and they use this to guide their decisions of where they're going to go. So I don't know if that's the kind of thing these guys are trying to do, but this is just the beginning of understanding these transcriptional changes and why these lifestyles are driving specific genes to be expressed in a coherent manner. The next thing I want to show you is another biobot called an Anthrobot. Now, when you look at this, it kind of looks like something that would have come from the bottom of a pond somewhere. It looks like a primitive organism. If you tried to guess the genome, you would, based on those criteria, you would be very wrong. The genome here is 100% normal Homo sapiens. These are made of adult human cells, unedited. They're made from tracheal epithelia. They basically self-organize into these motile little creatures. It's swimming here in a group of other cells. We try to do this, like I think it's trying to do the same thing that Xenobots do, which is to collect these things into a ball. But it doesn't. It doesn't seem to do kinematic replication successfully the way that Xenobots can. But in any case, and by the way, both for these and the Xenobots, I'm not making any claims about their specific capabilities as far as cognition, because we're just now starting to study their memories, their ability to learn, their preferences, problems they can solve, and so on. We don't know that yet, so I'm not making any claims about it. But morphologically, what's happened is that these cells have basically formed a new kind of creature that doesn't look anything like any stage of normal human development. It just has a completely different lifestyle. It doesn't look like anything that you would expect from human cells. It has a number of interesting properties. It can self-repair. So what you see here, after mechanical damage, the Anthrobot actually can repair itself, and it will repair itself towards the new pattern. So in other words, the kind of homeostasis you see in limbs, in amphibians and in planarian fragments, this thing does eventually repair itself to the new Anthrobot shape. And they don't just repair themselves, they also repair other things in their environment. So if you grow a bunch of human neurons on a petri dish, you take a scalpel, you put a big scratch through it, here's a neural wound, the Anthrobots, which are here labeled in green, will collect, and we call it a superbot cluster. There's maybe a dozen of them collecting here. And what you'll see after about 4 days, what you see is that what they're doing is they're knitting across the gap. They're healing. This is what it looks like. They're healing the injury. So who would have thought that your tracheal epithelial cells, which sit there quietly in your airway for long periods of time, dealing with mucus and air particles and so on, that they have the ability to comprise a novel, self-motile little creature that, by the way, also knows how to heal neural wounds. And so, again, this, by the way, this is what it looks like. These little guys have cilia covering their surface. That is how they move. There are several different types. They have four different behaviors. They have discrete behaviors, and we can draw an ethogram of transition probabilities between their behaviors. And even more than Xenobots, they have thousands, about 9,000 transcripts, so half the genome, that they express differently than their tissue of origin. So again, no genetic change, but in a new environment, they dip into their genetically provided toolkit and express thousands of genes differently. And who knows, we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of what they're actually capable of. So that plasticity, this idea that you're a bunch of tracheal epithelial cells in a matrix, you're not going to be able to make an entire human, but you can make something else. And you can make something else and then repair to that goal and express novel genes and exert other types of effects on your environment that we're not very good at guessing or predicting upfront. So again, no history of selection to be a good Anthrobot. There's never been any Anthrobot. So that I think that plasticity is part of the spectrum of intelligence that we're all talking about. So I'm going to start to wrap up here, but I just want to mention a couple of other topics that we could talk about. The first is the intelligence ratchet. Basically, the competency of the material, the fact that the material is an agential material that does teleological types of problem solving and also many other things, makes evolution go completely differently. And you can see that in these two papers. We did a lot of simulations and some analysis of what happens when you evolve over an agential material, and it basically ends up making this really interesting ratchet that just turns that keeps cranking up the different types of intelligence. And so there are implications for evolution. We could also talk about a story of the cognitive light cone. We define the cognitive light cone as the size of the biggest goals that a system could pursue. So not how far it can sense or act, but the size of the biggest, in whatever space, the size of the biggest goal it can pursue. And you can see what's happening here with single cells having a tiny little cognitive light cone that only cares about this region of space and a little bit of anticipation potential, a little bit of memory. But when you gather into collectives, you can have these grandiose goals. So these things have the goal of building this limb. And again, you know it's a goal because if you try to prevent them by cutting it off, it will keep rebuilding it. But this is a part of a story around. This is all part of a story around the scaling of goals in teleology. So you can be a teleological system, but you can have little tiny sort of humble goals, or you can have these very large grandiose construction projects as goals. And that way of thinking about it has some great implications for cancer therapeutics. And you know we're pursuing that, the ways to specifically understand.
Not to mention for humanity. So one thing I wanted to interject before I forget, when he was talking about how these Xenobots, for example, have no record of Xenobots, and there's nothing in the frog DNA that would make them assemble themselves that way. That implies an active intelligence in the field. So, God is the organizing principle.
Cancer as a dissociative identity disorder of this collective intelligence. When cells disconnect, you can actually use that as a cancer detection modality. And in fact, you can forcibly reconnect them despite their oncoproteins and so on, and basically prevent or reverse tumorigenesis. And so this is we did this in frog, and now it's in the human cancer spheroids and so on. And then kind of the next thing I'll mention is what it is that drives this homeostatic loop. So one thing that you can imagine, and all of this is discussed here, that stress and the sharing of stress among cells is part of the engine that keeps cells in this homeostatic cycle. So being away from your goals is stressful. And there are some interesting collective dynamics of how stress scales to enable larger and larger systems to pursue larger and larger goals. And then the final kind of part of this story is that the same issue with an unreliable medium affects both cognition and evolution. In other words, both memory engrams and genetic information have to be interpreted. They cannot be taken literally because of this bottleneck where information is squeezed down into this thin representation and latent space. And so this is learning, and then from here, this is the now moment where information has to be creatively reinterpreted. And this I think is what provides this amazing plasticity. It's because from the very beginning of life, the material could not take any information literally. It had to take them as prompts or suggestions, and evolution cranked on this part, which is the creative, confabulatory aspect of life that takes its information, whether those be your memories or those be your genetic material, and does its best to tell not the same story that was told before necessarily, but the most adaptive story it can tell going forward into the future. And all of that is described here. And again, I think this is part of that intelligence ratchet. Okay, the actual final thing I'll say is this: that what we've been looking at today, all during this talk, is different aspects of intelligence in the living material, and the thing is that unexpected cognitive competencies like goal directedness, like different kinds of problem solving, is not just the province of complex biological systems. It turns out that even extremely minimal, deterministic, simple systems, and in this paper here, we studied sorting algorithms, so things like bubble sort and so on that people have been studying for, I don't know, probably 60 years or more. And we found out that even in that system, if you look at it the right way, it's actually doing some very interesting side quests that are not anything that the algorithm is telling them to do. So in other words, even simple systems can provide unexpected navigation of various spaces. And so this means that we need to be very careful about assuming that large complexity is necessary for some of these things, or that quote unquote passive matter isn't doing some of the things that that life is doing in this regard. I think we are really bad at noticing cognition in unexpected places. And for this reason, I like looking for it in these very surprising, very minimal systems. And so I think we really need to get better at noticing it in molecular networks and other kinds of substrates. So I'll stop here and just thank all the people who did the work. So the postdocs and PhD students and our many amazing.
Holy shit, you guys. All right, so we're going to check out just a little bit of another video, and I'm going to play the rest of it. We're going to do a bunch of these because he has a lot to say. But check out this flying squirrel clip. Where is it? Here.
What if it's not that there are physical beings that are looking for patterns they're trying to find? What if we look at it from the perspective?
Great. Thank you very much. Very happy to be here, even though remotely, to share some thoughts with you on agency. And because there are many details that go into all the things I'm going to say today in 1 hour, you can follow all the downloads, the software, the data sets, everything is here. And this is my personal blog where I write things around what I think all of these things mean in terms of a bigger picture. So what I'd like to do today is kind of three things. I'd like to introduce some of the ways I think about this field in general and some kind of broader philosophical approaches. And then I'm going to show you some very specific examples of the kind of thing I mean, because it is very important to me that these conceptual frameworks engage with the empirical science. And so I want to show you that that actually we now have ways of studying all of this, and that these kinds of ideas do lead to new discoveries, which I think is very important. And then at the end, I'll say some more, maybe some more controversial things around what I think the future is going to look like. So the first thing I want to think about is the story of the electromagnetic spectrum. So back before we had a proper theory of electromagnetism, two things were happening. One is that we had all kinds of phenomena which were thought to be different, and in particular, they used different terminology. So we had lightning, and we had static electricity, and we had magnets, and we had light, and all of these things. And people were completely convinced that these are different things. If you tried to speak of them sort of using the same terminology, people would tell you that you're committing some sort of a category error, that those are fundamentally different kinds of things. So that's the first situation. And the second was that because of our own evolutionary history, there were massive regions of the spectrum of which we were completely unaware. We could not sense or operate or relate to any of the phenomena out here, short of this little narrow band that we're sensitive to, and we simply had no idea that any of this existed. So what a good theory of electromagnetism allowed us to do were two things. First of all, unification. That is, we were able to understand that actually all of these phenomena, despite the fact that we've had for thousands of years different names for them, nevertheless are all one thing. In other words, and I'm going to lean on this throughout the talk, science is moving forward whether or not our ancient linguistic categories keep up with it or not. And I think they should keep up with it. But so what science told us is that actually those things are all the same, even though we have different words for them. And two, the fact that because we have this much better theory of electromagnetism, we can now make technology that allows us to operate along regions that were previously inaccessible to us, which improves the quality of life. So what I'm going to argue is that the exact same situation currently exists in the field of diverse intelligence or cognition more broadly. That basically we have lots of phenomena that people, because of these ancient linguistic categories people insist on are different. People talk about crisp categories of things like living organisms and machines, and they like binary kinds of labels, as in this is intelligent, this is just physics, and so on. And I'm going to argue that we're basically in the same situation here, where we can now develop a good conceptual frameworks and the technology that they enable to move beyond these limitations. And so one of the things that I'm working on is a framework that enables us to recognize, create, and ethically relate to very diverse agents. So this includes, of course, the familiar animals and maybe some more unusual things, whales, octopus, people like to think about those things, but also some very unusual creatures like colonial organisms and swarms, engineered new life forms, so synthetic morphology, AIs, whether software or robotically embodied, perhaps someday exobiological agents, and then actually some even much more unusual kinds of things, which we probably won't get to today, but I can talk about them if people want. In the Q&A, which are not even strictly speaking recognized today as physical beings at all, and these are patterns within media. So my goal is to develop a framework that allows us to think about all these things and understand what they have in common. And very critically, it has to move experimental work forward. In other words, not only should it drive new discoveries in biomedicine, in bioengineering, but it also should drive improvements in our way in ethics, in our ways to relate to other beings. And the first version of it is here in this very lengthy paper that tries to lay this out in great detail. Of course, I'm not the first person to try for something like this. Here's Rosenbluth, Wiener, and Bigelow. And around 1943, talking about the cybernetic perspective of how you get from passive matter all the way up to human-level metacognition and things like this. But if you want, you can sort of emphasize these transitions, or you can think about it as a spectrum. But either way, I think that what we're dealing with here is what I call the axis of persuadability. In other words, I take a very for the purposes of this discussion. I take a very engineering approach to these things, where I think agential claims are basically interaction protocol claims. That is, when we say something has a degree of intelligence or cognition or agency or whatever, we are not really trying to debate the essence of what it truly is, some sort of ground truth that we can all agree upon after we fight about it for a while. Actually, what we're saying instead is a very observer-relative claim that I'm going to use a set of tools, maybe hardware rewiring, maybe control theory and cybernetics, maybe behavior science and rewards and punishments and things like that, maybe psychoanalysis and love and friendship and whatever else happens at this end of the spectrum. So I have a set of tools, and I'm going to use those set of tools to interact with the system, and then we can all see how well that worked out for both of us, meaning that it is a publicly observable empirical claim that a certain set of tools is appropriate to a certain system. And so this is very important, because it means that we can't sit back in our armchairs and philosophically have feelings about this. I don't think we can say, well, this is just a chemical reaction. It definitely is not conscious or cognitive or whatever. Nor can we say, wow, there's a spirit under every rock. The whole universe is this beautiful mind together. I mean, maybe, but you can't decide that just sort of, based on feelings. You have to do experiments, and you have to show which of the kinds of tools that we're used to, or in fact, new tech tools that we have developed, give you any kind of a purchase on the system. So that's what I'm interested in. I will also point out, though, that in moving up, and sometimes I give a talk that sort of goes across all of these increasingly more unusual kinds of agents. In moving up, what happens is sort of what happened when we discovered new kinds of numbers. We had counting numbers, and then somebody came up with zero, and then the negative numbers and fractions, and then irrationals and so on. And the interesting thing is that in widening your view of what a number is, going from this pre-scientific counting thing to some very weird, transcendentals and so on, there's a few things that happen. You have to break conceptual categories, right? You have to break assumptions that you've had. And actually, this is this is quite painful. You know, some people like this poor guy Hippos he was thrown off a ship apparently for breaking some assumptions about rational numbers and things like that. And so I think what we have in the field today is a kind of mind blindness where we are stuck on some ancient categories that prevent us from seeing and relating to an important part of the world. And getting past that certainly does make things more complicated. And it upsets a number of established categories. People get really upset over this stuff. I know because I get the emails from everybody who's kind of ticked off in either direction based on the things I'm going to say. But I really do think it makes for more meaning in the world, and it makes our experience more beautiful. So specifically, what I think we need to do is to get beyond this kind of ancient vision of our relationship to the world. This piece of art is called "Adam Names the Animals in the Garden of Eden," and of course, what it's telling us, and I think this has to be discarded, is this idea that there are discrete natural kinds. We all know what these animals are, and then here's Adam, and he's separate, he's different from all of them. So all of that I think has to go. But the good part of this, and the very deep I think part of this piece of art, is that in this ancient story, it was up to Adam to name the animals. God couldn't do it, the angels couldn't do it, Adam had to be the one to name them, and that's for two reasons. One is because in those ancient traditions, naming something meant you've discovered its true inner nature. And this, I think, is very important, because we are going to have to, as a species, we are going to have to discover the true inner nature of all kinds of weird creatures that I'll talk about, and give them names in that sense, that we must begin to understand them. And of course, the other thing is that it was up to Adam to do this, because he was the one that would have to live with them. And all of us are going to be living in a very different world moving forward, I think, and so this has to be updated. Now let's just talk about some different kinds of agency. First of all, it's very easy to detect this kind of thing in brainy mammals. So here's this creature has a very good theory of mind. It sets up this little accident scene right there, puts it right on the neck there, and because he knows what reaction he's going to get out of his human owners. And in fact, if nothing happens too quick, he's going to look. Are they watching? Yeah. So it's very easy. When we see things like this, we know exactly what's going on. No problem. And that's because they operate at the same scale of time, of space, of direction. They have the same, very similar goals to our basic fundamental goals, and they operate in the same space, the three-dimensional space. Although I will point out that even that is not so simple. And there's this paper that Karina Kaufman and I wrote recently, reviewing some cases of humans with very minimal brain structure, but normal or above normal cognitive performance. So actually, even with brains, things are not simple, because the mapping of the amount of brain real estate you have to the level of performance you're able to muster is actually not straightforward at all. I mean, these cases are rare, but they exist, and so they're telling us that we actually don't understand even this relationship. We don't understand very well. But let's move beyond that.
So next stream, we'll watch this whole talk. But I want to play some guitar tonight, so. Okay, so in our last few minutes, if you guys have anything you would like me to respond to in any kind of way, I'm down for that. Obviously, I mean, I probably don't have to tell you guys that what he was describing is the end of an era. And, you know, I'm not really much of a conspiracy theorist. I think of myself as more of a realist. Right? Like, you have a small group of powerful people. They have the ability, the motive, you know, like, come on. And the suppression of this awareness that Levin is describing scientifically, we have records of it going all the way back. You know, it happened in Rome. Aristotle protested, saying humanity would be lost. without this knowledge to keep them fucking magnetic north, you know. What else? Yeah, you know, it's being suppressed. Michael Levin only getting a couple thousand views on his videos is completely insane. I mean, you have to read between the lines a little bit. But with his nanobots, he's established that there's an active intelligence in the field. That is what we call God, you know. And it's true. It's not the fairy tale sky god scenario. It's the organizing principle. But it is there. You know, the Xenobots, they were doing things, they have no history. The things they were doing, they have no history for them. There was never such an organism. They don't even have neurons, you know. I mean, the proof of some sort of universal mind. This research is like 13 years old or something now, to 15 years old. Can you imagine? We've had this, like, sitting around collecting dust for a decade and a half, and it's not common knowledge. And we're not done, you know? I mean, he's got like 100 academic videos. It's deeply satisfying for me because this has always been my message. You know, I know some of you guys have followed me since the beginning, and it was always about, you know, find your system's true orientation, align that. You'll find that it's already aligned with a collective goal state. Then you'll find that there's all sorts of help that you'll get once aligned with that, because you have this field and all of these beings constrained towards this singular purpose, right? And the other part of the message was always that, you know, there's some kind of intelligence, but everything is constrained by the laws of nature and everything works on a mechanism. But within those parameters, everything is possible and it's all happening, you know? So all I could do most of my life is say that to people. You know what I mean? But now that Levin has established a lot of the mechanisms and proofs and stuff, it's a very different conversation, you know, because we're not coming from a place of just like subjective experience and opinion. So thank you, Dr. Levin, for that shit, man. That was sorely needed. All right, I don't see any questions or subjects in the chat. I'll give you guys another minute because I know I have some lag. It could take you a second, so. And then if nothing comes in, I might even do this live. I don't know. I feel like playing guitar. I drank some San Pedro earlier, and it's still working a little bit, so I feel like I could probably tear that guitar up. So that's what I'm finna do. But yeah, you know, we understand basically what's going on with the universal mind, and you can get information from it about how it works. You know, this is something I've done enough times that I know it's not a fluke. You know, AI calculates the odds of one of the things I put together of guessing correctly at like 1 in a trillion. And then it put together the context of all of them being lucky guesses at like 26 septillion, 1 in 26 septillion, you know, and it had to do with Calabi-Yau manifolds and the Fourier transforms and the Euler equation, which I didn't really know anything about, but I knew how these things work together. I described it all. And then it was published. And, and this I have proof of. There's all of the interactions with the AI previous to the Langland's proofs, and it's like really abstract physics and stuff. And you can tell I'm not guessing. I just knew what the components were. I can't do the math, don't get me wrong, but I did know. And basically what I was looking for was the mechanism of the universal mind, and basically the concept was that something more fundamental than particles, which is the exact same language the Langland's proof used, more fundamental than particles. And it's like the neurons of the universal mind, right? And they actually host brains, which killed me. I was already calling these things the neurons of the universal mind, and I find out they have brains in them. And their job is basically to determine the trajectory and mass of particles and also to assist them in their assembly, how they combine to make bigger things, which is exactly what I was looking for in terms of the mechanism that converts the ideal to the actual. And the whole point of all of this was that I knew that there's a connection between light and gold that's on the level of allegory made physical. And so that's what got me thinking about this mechanism of the universal mind. But after presenting it all to a friend who has a PhD in computer science and a lesser degree in mathematics, he was like, yeah, this is, you definitely legitimately, this is transconscious information reception without a doubt, but you're going to need to get a PhD so that people will, and I was like, no, I got a 7th grade education. I'm almost 50. Like, I don't have money, you know what I mean? Like, that's not happening. But then I started thinking, okay, so what am I going to run into as an obstacle that is impassable here? And I needed to find a harmonic resonant geometry that existed in light and gold. And the problem was that you cannot get light to hold still so that you can get a measurement, and this pattern would exist in things that have an allegorical or like mental level connection across scales. So Langland's published that they had found this harmonic resonant geometry that existed at different scales. And then they made a 5th state of matter out of light, and someone had the immediate thought, I guess, maybe more scientists are into alchemy than you would think, that they should compare light and this gold, this slow light, sorry, not gold and slow light. And they indeed do share this harmonic resonance. So, you know what I mean? Like, I just wanted to know this thing and thought about it. And that's what came into my head, And I think that the reason that that's so uncommon has more to do with engineering than it does with it being some lofty elite skill or something, In fact, I one of the reasons I know that's the case is that I've seen people from hundreds of years ago do it many times. Eliphas Levi in his book, he has a clear understanding of like the electromagnetic nature of consciousness and all sorts of things that he shouldn't have even been able to articulate back then. Also, Albert Pike, the 33rd degree Freemason, talking about how eventually electromagnetic energy would be used to send messages across the planet in an instant, and things of that nature that they shouldn't have been able to know, and they obviously did. Like alchemy, this knowledge, I'm convinced, it was real, and it wasn't just allegory for spiritual transformation. It was both physical and spiritual. They're not different. And so Albert Pike also describes the technique, very cursory. But he said, they apply a charge to mercury. And today in a laboratory, we apply a charge to mercury to knock a proton off of it, and it becomes gold. We obviously knew how it was done. Even Hermes in the Corpus Hermeticum, he very explicitly describes the process of light crystallizing into matter, basically. But some of the details, I wish I could recall, so I could just rattle them off right now. But if you know the processes, you can tell he's using the language that was available to him at the time to describe these things. Also, the Kabbalistic creation model reflects what Penrose thinks happens with his CCC theory, that, light becomes matter, and then eventually every particle collides with its antiparticle, and they become photons. Starts as light, ends as light, process repeats. And you can actually take all of the major stages of the coagulation of the universe and place them in the Sephira. We really have had, we've been shortchanged tremendously in terms of realizing our potential as a race, as individuals. And I think collectively we've fucking had it, And one of the beautiful things about Levin's research is that he has shown that stress is not recorded in the way that these other adaptations are. He did say that the deer horn regenerates the scar, so that kind of contradicts it. But in the last video, there was a little asterisk, and it said, the stress responses aren't part of this collective memory, but they are somehow sort of absorbed and integrated by everything that's involved with that goal state. Basically meaning that everyone's suffering is your suffering. And the more people there are focused on this singular goal, the happier and more effective and, this modern kind of, let's call it a psychosis, because that's really what it is. But this self-interest as like our fundamental goal state is not even the best thing for the individual. It's about time motherfuckers recognize, because I'm tired of this bullshit, man. Better fucking analyze, recognize the motherfucking situation. Get high and analyze your crime, correctly organized. Fuck with the soldier, get surprised. All right, guys, I guess I'm going to go on to other stuff, and please pass this on, make people watch it. It's important that they realize, there's, this is not an argument at this point. It's a scientific reality. And I'm telling you, man, I have been needling at them. I've been picking at them. I've become, I guess, articulate enough to get neuroscientists and shit to talk to me, which was wild. This guy, I've argued with him a ton. He's one of the world's leading, neuroscientists, like academic researchers, and he has no fucking clue. He has no fucking clue about Levin, or, he didn't even know what non-neural cognition was. like, if that's not evidence of suppression, it's evidence of a ton of shit, you know. But the first step in fixing it is just telling motherfuckers what it is, you know what I'm saying?